Right, we are up to lesson 3, up to our knees and intervention. Which, don't acknowledge that I said hips before and now we're at knees. In my brain, those made sense, and I understand now, saying it out loud, that it doesn't, but we're going to go with the cute titles because it's all I could think of. Anyway, moving on. This lesson we're going to talk about monitoring and interpreting that data. So, keep calm. Monitoring and evaluation is easy. Let's move on. All right, monitoring. Before you even begin to monitor, start with a plan. You need to have a concrete, clear plan of what's going to happen. To start, after we have our plan, okay, this is how many times we're going to meet with the student, this is how many times we're going to collect worksheets or student data, this is how many times we're going to collect observations, this is who and what is happening with this student. After all of that for our plan is created, which I'm going to talk about more in depth as we move on through this slide, so don't panic. I know I just spouted a lot of things at you. We start with a baseline. We need the baseline data, which is that screener. But what we want to do with all data, any data we get, we want to put it into something that shows growth or shows no growth or all of those things. Tables work. So we can see how many students the questions, how many skills the student is lacking, how many questions they're getting wrong, all of those things. We like to graph things. We're going to touch on graphing more, but we are going to do that. Now, after we have our baseline data, we know what the student is missing. We know where we want, what we're starting with. We've made like our white Play-Doh. We're about to add color. We have our white Play-Doh right now with this baseline. We're going to create goals. That means at what time and how much and how often should this child be showing growth. And that goes back to this whole plan. Like I said, when you're creating these plans, we're creating a timeline for how many times we're going to meet, how much data collection is going to be collected, observations, are we collecting student worksheets, are we doing an assessment, are we doing the screener, before, are we doing the screener again in the middle, and then are we doing it at the end, so that by the time we get that middle point, we can truly see, is this intervention working, are those skills being, is that something we've thought about? If we're not doing it that way, how are we making sure that we are watching for growth? Because you can collect all the data you want, but that's not monitoring. Monitoring is making sure that we're interpreting that data and we're understanding what is happening. Okay? Data, I've used the word data. I've talked about it briefly so far, but lots of things make up data. Student data, that's, any student work that they've completed, worksheets, those online assignments that we collect test scores from, journal entries if it's, writing, notes. Notes are great. How well a student takes notes, that's great data. Are they able to take notes? Because that's a huge point. Can they even take notes? We're also, data and what we're monitoring and what we're collecting is the interventions and tests and intensity. Now, you want to write down what our plan said. So if you and I are meeting down and we're meeting with Susie and we are talking about how we're in 5th grade and Susie is working on division and Susie has no skills, and I created my baseline and I said I'm going to meet with her daily, I'm going to collect all of her student data, which means I'm collecting every single worksheet she turns in, and I'm collecting every note page and I'm scanning it, into the computer or making a copy of it so I have it so I can look at what skills we are getting through to her. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write that I plan to meet with her every day. Now, a key part of that monitoring is sometimes things don't go to plan. I know that. You know that as an educator. They love to hear that we have a plan, and then students just throw it out the window. They just throw that shit out the window. And we know that that throws things off. So then you need to monitor and you need to collect and write down how many times you actually meet with the students, how much data you actually collected, how many times they did the intervention in a day, how long the intervention was. All of these things need to be written down. The plan, your plan that we started with needs to be written down, and then what actually happens need to be written down. Attendance is data that we can collect. It's hugely important. If Susie only comes 1 day a week, then this intervention might not be the intervention's fault that it's not working. It's, Susie's attendance that's not working. Behavior. Are we wasting 15 minutes because Susie's arguing with me? Are we wasting 15 minutes because Susie can't hold a pencil and she's playing with it? Are we wasting 5 minutes because it's redirection? Susie, make sure you keep your feet on the ground. Susie fell out of her chair because she can't sit still in the chair. Write those behaviors down. That is documentation that proves what is happening during the intervention and why or why not it's working. And you want everything you can have written down. Observations. If you're not meeting with the student that day, but they're working on assignments in their groups together or even individually, and they're still utilizing that intervention, walk around, write your observations. How is Susie doing alone? Is she reaching out to other students if, that's allowed? When she's in groups, is she participating in the group, or is she sitting back and letting all the other students do the talking? Because, those are big key factors in how this intervention is going for her. She could look great on paper, but if we get to group time and she's not participating and she's not talking, these are observations we want to make, because that means she's not getting it. An attitude. If Susie hates math, Susie is not going to learn math. Now, I know a lot of students come with you for predispositions of subjects or predispositions about school or predispositions about assignments even. My big brother's doing this, or my sister did this 3 years ago, we better be doing it now. Those kinds of things. So part of our job as an educator is to notice those attitudes and try to change them to be positive attitudes and things that we can work with. And writing that down for each student is huge. Now, I did just say each student. And I'm sure most of you that are watching this video and listening to me talk and talk and talk about monitoring just turned off, right? Why do I have to collect data for every single student? That's so much work. It is. But there's great ways to do data that you can utilize that take time away. You're doing grade books, aren't you? Yeah, I know you have to turn in grades. Lots of schools and districts use online grade books. I would say almost everyone uses online grade books. All those sections have comments. Add comments. You can turn most of those online grade books, you can turn the comments off. So parents can't see the comments, but you can. And then you can print it if you need a hard copy, but it's all online. We have teachers in DODEA, which is the Department of Defense Education facility that I'm currently affiliated with. We have teachers that are taking Google Classroom, and each student has a file in the educator's student or Google Classroom, and she just drops assignments in there. Anytime they turn in online assignments, she goes, okay, cool, I'm going to drop you into this student's file. And then when that student leaves this grade level, they have a whole online portfolio of work, of notes, of everything that teacher's collected. If this teacher notices something funky about their notes or notices that they take notes really well, she scans them in and drops them in that Google folder. They leave with an online portfolio to go to the next classroom, and that is stellar. And it takes this teacher no more time than grading. She's grading things anyway, so she just does it. She has them turn things in on Google Classroom. She has anything that she grades, she just scans, and then she takes maybe 25 minutes more to just go, oop, you go there, you go there, you go there. And these students leave with online portfolios. That way it's not paper you have to keep. If you're not tech savvy, that's fine. When you grade it, don't give it back. Go get huge folders or, the accordion files, anything you can think of that'll hold boxes. I had a teacher years and years ago that all of our work went into a box in the room, like a shoebox almost. You know how they make manila file folder boxes? They had a bunch of those, and my name was on it, and that's where I put things. So all of my documents were in there, and then I had a living record that I could take to the next school year. So while monitoring sounds like a lot of work, it's stuff you're already doing. You just have to think about doing it intentionally with a purpose. Okay, so now we have monitored, we have collected, we have set out a plan, we know we're going to meet, we know we're going to talk. Well, we've collected data. Now we got to interpret it. Because if we're not interpreting this data, then we're not truly, truly monitoring. We're just collecting data. I mean, we got to understand that data. What does it mean? Why? What is happening? There's a whole list of questions on the notes page to ask when you're interpreting data, but you're going to ask all kinds of questions. Anything that pops into your head about a student or any graph, or go back to math class years and years ago, when they would show a graph and they'd be like, all right, what questions can you think of? What questions does this graph answer? Ask those questions. Ask. Anything you can think of, because the more questions you can ask about student data, the better you will be about interpreting that data, and you'll have a better understanding of the student's skill set and their growth at the end of it. I find that it's very helpful when interpreting data to throw it into something physical, like a chart or a table, or even pop it into Excel really quick and then pull up like a bar graph, so you can see like 1 week ago they were scoring this much, this week they're scoring this much. Are those bars going up? Do a line plot, enter it really quickly. Again, throw this data into an Excel sheet really quick and see, so you have a visible representation of what you're looking at. If a student's plateauing, where they shot up, they did really well, and now all of a sudden they've stopped. Look at that, and then when it's in a chart form, with dates and things like that, you can look at where they plateaued, and you can go, okay, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. They've stopped growing. Why? And you can pull up in your other data that you've collected what was happening. Did something happen at home? Were their behaviors off that week? Were they sick? Did they come to school every day? What are their worksheets showing? Did they take the notes like they were supposed to? Did I notice anything when I was making observations that stand out? What was happening in the classroom? Having a visual chart that you can look at and see those highs and lows and steady points and, plateaus is huge. It really allows you to have focus points and to have things like that so you know what's happening. Because sometimes just staring at numbers gets super confusing, and it's just not, it gets exhausting. And the cool thing about this, though, is if you do it for your groups. So, like, take averages, do it for those skill groups when you're interpreting data. Be like, okay, I met with this group focusing on this skill, and their average score was this, and, monitor average scores. And then when their averages start to lower or increase and things like that, you can say, okay, was it everyone increasing? And you can pull that individual student data, and it will really increase your understanding of your students' academic success. This is just a chart, but this is his reading progress, and he was given one of those tests where they read, we call it OR, and Dodea is the program we're currently using, but they read a passage and you mark, if they got the word right, if they were able to sound it out, what they did, if they said it twice, the first time they got it wrong, the second time they got it correctly. These are his overall scores, or words read correctly, and you can see this line, and you can see that there's a steady increase in his ability every single time they did this. This blue line on top is his growth line, or the plan. This was what we wanted him to be able to do. So when we did that plan, we said, okay, he would be able to do this amount by this time, and it would increase at this rate. So that's this blue line, his growth line, and then his actual line is that black dotted line, and you can see that they don't exactly line up. And this is something that if you're meeting with a team, or if you're doing it by yourself as an educator, you can look at and go, okay, what happened? Did he just not increase at the level I expected him to? Is it because the intervention wasn't working? Was it an attitude issue? Was it an attendance issue? Was it, go back to notes, was it a notes issue? Did other things happen? Were we interim testing? Were we, doing things like that? Did we have a lot of holidays that month? This is where looking at this and seeing why didn't it match up to my goals is really, really helpful. More student data. This isn't student data. I apologize. Well, it is student data, but it's also how many times the intervention was implemented and the percentage of implementation. So this graph, they worked with a team and they said at step 1, everybody did 100% of their work and they implemented it to the 100%. Like they did everything. And this graph is cool because then you can see, was it the fault of the teachers that an intervention didn't go into place? Was it maybe that it just, things don't always work out like we want them to as educators. Life happens because real life is happening to your students every day and it's happening to you. So sometimes you're going to have days where, like step number 2, where implementation percentage, only 40%. We only were able to implement that step to the 40%. We couldn't go any higher. That's okay, but having it documented like we talked about earlier and really monitoring it and then graphing it allows us to see where we failed. So we can see if the intervention was unsuccessful, maybe it wasn't the student, maybe it was us. And that gives you an overall picture of the intervention. And again, an overall picture of student success and student ability. Because at the end of the day, we are human and we are going to make mistakes. And sometimes it's our fault that they don't learn. And I think that having this documentation holds educators accountable. I thought I had one more slide. I do not. So I'm going to lecture for 2 more seconds about monitoring. And I'm going to I want to go back to this page. So when it talks about goals, we want how much that child should grow in a certain time frame. And one of those charts, I said there's a growth line. Start with a growth line. I want to just really make sure I hit home with this because having a growth line and then having actual student data and seeing if they match allows you as an educator to see, are your expectations realistic? Was the plan realistic? Where did we fail? Where did we succeed? Where did the student fail? Where did the student succeed? All of those things. And monitoring is so much about the student as it is so much about what you are doing as an educator and what the team that is working with the student is doing if you are working with a team. The important thing that I want to end this lesson on, and this might be the shortest lesson because honestly, you're already monitoring as educators. You know how to do this. I just want you to do it with meaningful intentions behind it. I want you to seriously think about what data you are collecting from students. Not what data is going in a grade book, because I know you have certain grades that you have to post and how many grades and blah, 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 per your regulations at your school or at your district. I know. But truly focus on why you are collecting that data and what this data is proving. What are those grades proving? We want those grades to be intentional. We want them to show growth or lack of growth. And we want them to show what the student's capable of, what their academic skill level is at. Monitoring makes grades and data collection and student work intentional and meaningful.